This is now the craziest video I've ever made. And it's been 12 hours. Are you filming that?
Argentina is always double.
What just happened, Ellie?
My words aren't going to do justice. Roll the tape.
My name's Ellie Menjum, and for the past few years I've been traversing Europe, documenting the tales of football clubs and their fan bases who've been on the verge of winning something for the first time in a long time, if not ever. From northern Turkey to southern Spain, from southwest Germany to the Basque Country, I've been on a mission to show how important it is that the game has a variety of winners so that we learn about new places, new people, new cultures, and most importantly, new stories. Then came the 2022 FIFA World Cup, where I knew the exact once-in-a-lifetime story I had to tell. So as the world's media descended on Qatar to be at the tournament, Kopadani and I decided to fly 8,000 miles in the opposite direction to tell the ultimate story of a football fan base on the brink of ending the 36-year wait for the biggest prize in sport. But what we found was a story that transcended football, a story that reached into the very soul of a nation that laid itself bare over 2 fateful weeks. A story that etched a struggle for identity in a search for glory that began over 2 centuries ago. A story about Lionel Messi, Argentina, and 45 million people yearning to reclaim their place in history. This is the all-angle, on-the-ground, as-it-happened, ultimate account of perhaps the greatest football story of our time. This is Once in a Lifetime.
Okay. I want to start at the beginning of all this. We're good to go? Yep. We're good? Okay. What's in a name? Argentina. Why is this country called Argentina?
Argentina. It comes from the Latin argentum, means
Plata.
silver.
Silver.
The land of silver.
The assumption of the first Europeans who went over there was that it would be this incredibly rich country, as they found in Mexico, as they found in Peru.
Because the Spanish conquistadors, they thought that they were going to find a lot of silver here.
And in Mexican Peru, it had led to enormous amounts of gold being shipped across the Atlantic. It leads to incredible inflation in Europe.
In fact, they named the river as the River Plate. Plate is another word for silver.
Plata.
Yeah.
Plata, silver. Did they find lots of plata? What did they find?
Nothing.
The name itself is a myth.
Empty land, a few natives.
Well, and the indigenous people, we know why they're not there, because there's a genocide. I mean, that's the only word for it. They were slaughtered.
Nothing here resembles silver. The other way around.
Since its beginnings, Argentina's been obsessed with unattainable fortunes.
We think we're in the land of silver, but we're in the land of corrugated cardboard.
Argentina has this, people often say, the delusion of grandeur.
I am not a sociologist. I cannot explain where this is coming from, but I think there's a sense of entitlement which is not warranted.
But for all its false promises, there was one period where the country lived up to its lofty expectations.
You go back nearly about a century or so.
You want to put a date? 1880 until 1930.
It was one of the wealthiest countries in the world.
The Argentine, now known as one of the richest countries in the world.
The international economic situation was very favorable for Argentina.
GDP was on a par with Australia and many of the New World countries.
Argentina?
Mm-hmm.
Argentina had all the comparative advantages to develop, which was like this. We have something to offer to the world.
Yeah, it's got huge amounts of farmland.
With the new refrigeration technology, a century ago we're talking about, they were able to export beef to the European market, the North American market.
Today, the Argentine exports more cattle and hides than any other country in the world.
It wasn't just beef, I would say it was also agriculture.
I mean, basically, like, we have incredibly fertile land, like all of the Pampa Húmedo, which covers like quite a lot of like central Buenos Aires and around Santa Fe, have perfect conditions for agriculture.
We were feeding the world, practically.
And that made Argentina a remarkably wealthy country.
I mean, there's communications between the British and US government saying, you know, Argentina really is the coming place, and maybe we should think of sort of nudging Canada aside and putting Argentina in Canada's place.
Because Argentina was a very attractive destination.
And so, with such abundant wealth, came those in search of it.
Nuevos contingentes de inmigrantes llegan a Buenos Aires después de 18 días de feliz navegación.
It was a wonderful place to come because you have the opportunity to prosper.
Vienen por un destino mejor, por un destino que les devuelva la primaria alegría de vivir.
Relative to the size of the population, we had, for a period of time, more immigrants than the American.
This influx was an exclusively European migration, where the new arrivals hailed from all over the continent, be it Spanish, French, or even Russian. But the most significant arrivals were the Italians.
Hay a su bordo 940 inmigrantes italianos, casi 1 millar de hombres, mujeres y niños que han dejado atrás una vida para iniciar la nueva etapa que les ofrece nuestro cálido puerto de paz.
And with migration of the early 1900s, predominantly by boat, naturally the vast majority of Italian migrants came from Italy's port cities, many from the northern Italian port city of Genoa, but the majority from the southern port city of Naples.
You know what the nickname of Italian peoples are here? How do we call Italians? Tanos. You know why? For Napolitano. That's the reason. They all came from, most of them came from the south, and we identify them with Naples.
I tend to agree with people that say that Argentinians are Italian people speaking Spanish.
Buenos Aires itself is very linked to Italy, and particularly to southern Italy, and particularly to Naples. You see that in the accent, you see that in slang.
The rhythm, it's more Italian.
It's got a sort of sing-song quality like Italian, and that's obviously the Italian influence.
You see that in the cuisine, that there's a large Italian influence there.
Pasta, pizza, cold cuts, they came and they conquered the people's palate.
And you know, if you look at the architecture,
The Italian architectural legacy, which is either these very grand ornate buildings, and then you had the more modest single-story dwellings, which are called PHs.
when you're in Buenos Aires, you can be in a really run-down area and suddenly turn a corner, and there's an incredibly beautiful square that makes you feel like you're in a remote town in Italy.
So the Italians, I think they really left their mark in our culture.
But this influence wasn't just confined to accent and architecture, especially in Argentina's capital, where a distinct way of being was imported directly from Italy's south.
Buenos Aires is closer to Naples than to any other European city.
What, you mean in geography?
Culturally, the way we interact with each other.
I feel like this is a country of extroverts. They're warm, they're lovely, but they're really in your face.
See, if tomorrow he wins...
Tomorrow.
So Argentinians are very expressive. It's like...
¿Qué hubiese pasado si Argentina pasaba a las semifinales? And your sons?
They get quite hot-headed. They get quite passionate.
Él me pregunta a mí, ¿por qué qué?
And they use their hands.
Name 2 players who ever played with Maradona.
Nos creemos que tenemos la potestad de decirle a alguien que por ahí es más tímido, ¿cómo vas a hacer así, no?
That's why it was a perfect fit for Maradona and Naples, because they're like us.
Mira, nosotros somos en la gran mayoría descendientes de latinos, italianos, españoles. Lo que pasa es que creo que hemos superado esa emocionalidad que, o sea, nosotros le agregamos la cuota que nosotros decimos argenta.
Yeah, they're passionate about everything they do.
Se vive diferente la pasión.
Pues nosotros tenemos la pasión, la sangre.
They're passionate about their politics.
No, the obsession with Perón is extraordinary. I mean, you mentioned JFK, but the Argentine obsession with Perón is way more extreme.
They're passionate about their literature.
There's a big book scene here, and they still consume a lot of paper-printed material.
You will always find a bookstore.
For many, many years, we've had like more bookstores per capita than anywhere else in the world.
They're passionate about their music.
Tango is a very good example of our passion for music.
Carlos Gardel, who was the most famous tango singer, you'll see portraits of him all around the city.
Yeah, one of the things about Argentinian society, everything is it's extremes.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a country of extremes.
Para nosotros es como exacerbamos.
I don't know if they like to over-exaggerate, but everything is like grandiose and amazing, and yeah, I suppose there is quite a bit of that.
The best, the biggest, the longest, any superlative, they've got it.
Yes, sometimes we feel a little sense of superiority.
The best steak?
Yes, best steak in the world.
I couldn't think of a better steak elsewhere than in Argentina.
The thing with steak is like our entry level is so high that we're just spoiled.
The best wine?
The wine here is insanely good. Like
The Malbec for sure. There are some wines that even surprise the French.
Widest avenue in the world?
Yes, the widest and the longest as well.
Many Argentines are proud to say that they feel that we've perfected the gelato.
Yeah, it's a very, very passionate place.
So how does an Argentinian commit? He jumps from his ego.
I think we got the best ice cream.
Better than the Italians?
Yes, better than the Italians.
The Italian.
No. Yes.
Best ice cream is in Argentina.
Yes, it really is.
You see, in Argentina, passion isn't so much a hobby as a way of life, best summed up in one of the country's most iconic films.
¿Te das cuenta, Benjamín? El tipo puede cambiar de todo. De cara, de casa, de familia, de novia, de religión, de Dios. Pero hay una cosa que no puede cambiar, Benjamín. No puede cambiar de pasión.
And whilst everything and anything Argentinians care about is met with heightened levels of passion and adoration, there is one subject the country's most passionate about.
En el mundo es el país donde se vive el fútbol de una forma más pasional y popular.
You couldn't have Argentina without football. I think in a way it's just become part of its psyche. It's of its element, as of its like elemental being.
Nosotros nos definimos y muchas veces analizamos nuestra vida en función del fútbol.
I mean, football is Argentina.
El fútbol es lo que más se mueve en la Argentina.
Depositamos en el fútbol nuestra alegría cotidianamente.
El país vive fútbol. Un nene nace al año y ya se le da una pelota.
Es el país del fútbol.
But then let me ask you, why Argentina? Why do you think Argentina got so hooked? You've got other sports, but football is the be-all and end-all. It's like water here. It's just omnipresent.
Vamos a dividir en dos lados. Primero, el deporte. Y segundo, la pasión que representa ese deporte.
Porque justamente lo que genera el fútbol en la gente no lo genera el resto de los deportes.
You see, when you've got a population as passionate as Argentina, it only makes sense that they made the most passionate and emotional game theirs.
It's a relationship between Argentinian idiosyncrasy and the nature of football as a sport.
There's a characteristic of Argentina comes out through football.
Argentinian mentality and culture and the dynamics of football. It's like a perfect match. Think about it like this. Football is a low-scoring game. So you build up a lot of anxiety. You build up a lot of momentum. And when the actual moment arrives, the goal is an explosion. I'm gonna use this expression like an orgasm. There is something magical, something intrinsic about football. It's something that no other sport has.
Digo, vos vas a la cancha a ver cualquier equipo acá y por más que vayas solo, si el equipo hace un gol, un desconocido te abraza. No te quedás nunca festejando solo. Tipo, si todos gritan un gol, hasta el más tímido se terminan parando y abrazando con alguien. Porque también creo que si bien tenemos un montón de defectos y cosas a trabajar como sociedad, hay algo que nos enorgullece, que es poder compartir la alegría.
But it's not just the uniquely emotional and passionate elements of football that make this game so important to Argentina.
In 1913, there's a series of lectures at the Odeon Theatre in Buenos Aires, given by Leopoldo Lugones, who was a national poet. The president goes, lots of very senior figures. Everybody goes to these lectures. And this is a national poet talking about national character. Who are we? And he concludes that the spirit of Argentina is best represented by the Gaucho. The cowboy who made sure that the huge herds of cattle were safe, and from the huge herds of cattle you get the beef, and from the beef you get the wealth. So the gaucho is massively important. And also, the Gaucho is a very romantic figure. There's a reason why cowboy films are popular. Because the cowboy is glamorous.
In all the world of romance and adventure, there's none to compare with the Gaucho.
He's battling the elements, he's battling wild animals, he's got this great virtuosity. And so you get Gaucho clubs set up, and they all dress up, they dress to what they think Gauchos look like. They put on these big barbecues, and one of the reasons the asado, they do the great barbecues, is still an absolute centerpiece of Argentinian social life.
The Gaucho was romanticized in books, was romanticized in music, and also because of the way they dressed. So the Gaucho for sure was super important.
And then the British wipe him out. And the way they wipe him out is by introducing wire fencing. If you have wire fencing, you can do selective breeding. And if you can do selective breeding, you get a higher meat yield and you can make greater profits. And this absolutely revolutionizes Argentinian farming and thus Argentinian society. So economically, eventually the Gaucho and his influence is wiped out. So you then have the question, where do you find the Gaucho in an urban environment? So El Gráfico, one of the world's great sports magazines, at its peak it was selling, I think, over 100,000 copies across South America every week.
El Gráfico was born in 1919 and it ran until January 2018, so 99 years. It was this revered magazine product, Bible of sport, whatever you want to call it, but it was very special. Many people learned to read with El Gráfico.
It's not a football magazine, as in a glossy thing with a couple of interviews. It really goes into detail.
Maradona first met Pelé in a production specifically for El Gráfico. Muhammad Ali came to Argentina invited by El Gráfico. It was like the football's Rolling Stone magazine.
So El Gráfico, they say that spirit of a gaucho, that combination of toughness, cunning, cleverness, virtuosity, and glamour, where do you find that? And they say you find that in the Pibe. The Pibe is the urchin child of the streets.
Y el único juego que tienen es una pelota.
He learns the game on the potreros, on the vacant lots of the city.
The potrero is more than a football pitch. It's the imagination of a football pitch in an unthinkable terrain.
On very uneven surfaces, so you have to have this technical virtuosity to control the ball.
That could be full of holes, stones, glass.
They're often very crowded, too many people playing too small a space.
It's dirt, it's also tackles, it's also no referee.
And the schools, you have a teacher with a whistle to stop things if it gets out of hand. In the potreros, you have to be able to look after yourself. You have to have that cunning, that streetwiseness.
This is the place in which many talents couldn't survive.
So this is 928. Boracoto is the editor of El Gráfico. A Pibe with a dirty face. A mane of hair rebelling against the comb, with intelligent, roving, trickster and persuasive eyes, and a sparkling gaze that seemed to hint at a picaresque laugh, but does not quite manage to form in his mouth. His trousers are a few roughly sewn patches, his vest with Argentinian stripes, with a very low neck and with very many holes eaten out by the invisible mice of use. Barefoot or with shoes whose holes in the toes suggest they've been made through too much shooting. His stance must be characteristic. It must seem as if he is dribbling with a rag ball. If this monument is raised one day, there'll be many of us who will take off our hat to it, as we do in church. Now this is 1928, and what he's given you there, if you take that extract and you don't give people any context and say, who is that? It's Diego Maradona. It's obviously Diego Maradona. 49 years before Maradona makes his international debut, 32 years before Maradona's born, he predicts the coming of Maradona. And that's why when Maradona arrives, immediately he's celebrated because people have recognised this is the saviour we were promised.
You knew in your head that he will save you.
Porque para nosotros es un Dios.
And that's why he becomes El Pibe d'Or, the golden Pibe.
Eso Maradona, Maradona.
Tenemos dos, uno primero Dios, Jesucristo, y el otro Diego Armando. Es el Diego.
Maradona's importance to Argentina is greater than the significance of any one sporting figure to any other nation. I mean, Maradona exists on a totally different plane in Argentina to anybody else.
A man who adorns nearly every corner of the country's neighborhoods. A man responsible for a significant percentage of the male population being called Diego. A man who inspired a religion boasting tens of thousands of members all around the country.
Iglesia Maradonian.
Y cuando tengo que prender una vela por algo, se la prendo a Diego. Cuando tengo que pedir algo, se lo pido a Diego.
Maradona was larger than life, period.
But for anyone left who still doesn't know, Diego Armando Maradona was the man who in 1986 led an unfancied Argentinian side to their second ever World Cup trophy.
No one saw that he was going to put such an individual performance that a team that just a few days before the World Cup was performing very poorly and no one has any hopes about it, will transform it into a winning team.
It's a single moment, it's a single World Cup where like one player has grabbed the tournament by the scruff of the neck and won it. That's only happened once in the history of the game, of the World Cup.
That was the magic of Maradona.
All of which led to nationwide scenes and emotions the country had never experienced.
It's the greatest day in Argentine football history. Like, no, nothing's even close.
No podías caminar. Si se explotaba de gente.
You look at the celebrations after the final and it's extraordinary. It's millions of people on the street, these mass celebrations.
People were like moving cars. They're so happy they were moving cars, literally.
And as far as you can see, it's people, blue and white shirts everywhere.
I think winning that World Cup was almost as big as getting democracy back in '83.
And whilst yes, Argentina had won one other World Cup in 1978, that was won during a time the country were under a despised military dictatorship.
It was a fantastic victory, the 1978 World Cup, but there was always a dark cloud because of the military rulers of the time.
And so over time, it was that 1986 win that became a unique symbol of Argentine utopia.
That thing that surrounds, that World Cup, that mythology, it will never be, it cannot be replicated.
And whilst Argentinians fondly remember every moment of that tournament, there's one particular game from Mexico '86 that's remembered most fondly.
No, el Maradona le hizo los goles a England. Ese es el tema. Los goles a England. That is the question.
Now, there are many reasons why this match means so much to Argentina. Firstly, off the pitch.
Pero quiero aclarar algo, lo del 86 también tiene que ver, no te olvides que fue 4 años después de la Guerra de Malvinas.
On a day, May the 4th, 1982, that brought the reality of war into Britain's dispute with Argentina over the Falkland Islands.
Es absurdo, pero fue como una revancha contra Inglaterra por haber perdido la Guerra de Malvinas.
Then there's that game's meaning on the pitch, where Maradona scored both of Argentina's goals. The first being one of the game's most controversial.
De mano de Dios, hand of good. Uno con trampa, con la mano, que entonces, es decir, ahora lo jodimos nosotros a los ingleses.
And then there was his second goal.
What was the second goal?
No, I'm done. Cut.
I'm winding you up. I'm trying to get out. I know about it. It's the best goal of all time, I know. Only 4 minutes after the hand of God, Maradona collected the ball in his own half, beat 5 England players, rounded the keeper and scored what FIFA officially titled the goal of the century.
And Maradona scores those 2 goals against England in the 1986 World Cup quarter-final. And that is the Gaucho spirit projected through football, because they represent 2 sides of the Argentinian character. The cunning of the first goal and the virtuosity of the second. That's why it means so much.
But as beautiful as that second goal was, it's actually the first more controversial goal that Argentinians hold dearest, best explaining their unique love of Maradona and the game.
Dio más satisfacción el primer gol con la mano que el segundo extraordinario.
Okay, listen.
Se disfruta más.
Okay, so...
Viveza Criolla.
And if there's one term you need to know to understand the spirit of Argentine football, it's that one.
How do you say it again?
Viveza Criolla.
Viveza Criolla.
Yeah.
What is it?
So if Brazilians live the football in Jogo Bonito terms, we have something different, something very different. We call it
Viveza Criolla.
It's cunningness.
Yes, pretty much.
Cunning would be a very polite, nice way to describe Viveza Criolla.
Being smart enough to find a way through stuff, but also a little bit, doing something a little bit illegal.
Because it means both cleverness, streetwiseness, cynicism even.
Es la satisfacción de ganar con trampa.
Satisfaction of doing something illegal and get away with it.
I heard it's Argentina satisfaction.
Do you struggle with it?
Because you love beautiful football. I mean, I do love beautiful football, but I also like winning, you know.
It means just sort of being smarter than the opponent.
I can tell you this. We have an immense satisfaction in this country that he scored that goal with his hand.
I don't think that distinction is obvious to people from Argentinian culture.
It was a shock to me to realize that outside Argentina, that was perceived as a terrible thing, as cheating.
Argentinians, they also don't seem particularly ashamed by that. They kind of take it in their stride. Why?
No. Well, because this notion of Viveza Criolla, it encompasses, they do not see a distinction between tricking somebody by moving your feet really quickly or doing a feint with your body and drugging them.
That, of course, is a reference to arguably the one act of Viveza Criolla more infamous than the hand of God, masterminded in 1990 by the professor of Viveza Criolla, Carlos Bilardo, manager of Argentina's 1986 World Cup winning side.
The truth is nobody knows, but it is very strongly rumoured and not denied at all by Bilardo that they spiked Brazil's water bottles, put some kind of sedative in the water.
And Branco drank off it.
The Brazilian player?
Yeah, a left back. And he was woozy throughout the rest of the game. Don't drink out of that one.
And Bilardo, as a player, famously would take pins on the pitch to stab players he was marking.
Stick a needle in his sock and take it out in the corner kick and just stab opposing players with it. Okay. And that was nothing. That was nothing.
Bilardo was a qualified gynecologist, and he had contacts in the world of gynecology, and from them he would find out things about players' girlfriends and wives, and he'd use that to wind them up on the pitch. So Roberto Perfumo, the great Argentinian centre-back, he was sent off for punching Bilardo in the face, supposedly because Bilardo started talking to him about a problem that Perfumo's wife was having.
Bilardo, Maradona and the Viveza Criolla spirit took Argentina to another World Cup final 4 years later, before Argentina won 2 Copa Americas in a row.
They win the Copa America in 91 and 93, and then suddenly, 94, they stopped getting the results.
But by this point, Argentina had tasted such success on the international stage that expectations at every tournament were now raised to unrealistic levels.
I think the yearning for success from Argentina I think it's very hard to overestimate.
Con muchas expectativas, con todo siempre pensando que va a llegar a la final y va a ganar.
The 1986 World Cup immediately became the bar that everything was to be compared with that moment.
I mean, what was up to win the World Cup? That's how I grew up.
Why?
Because the first one I saw, we won it, and I thought it was a normal thing, the normal state of affairs. We have Maradona, we won the World Cup, we have to win it all the time.
And whilst from then on they weren't still winning tournaments, with a round of 16 appearance at World Cup 94, a quarter-final appearance in World Cup 98, and 2 quarter-final appearances at the Copa America, it was hardly a disastrous era. But for such a passionate nation who see the game, and particularly this tournament, as part of their identity, well, rationality doesn't play a role in expectations.
Quizás para Marruecos haber salido cuarto es algo extraordinario. Para Argentina salir segundo, para mucha gente eso es un fracaso.
And so despite boasting many of the 90s greatest footballers, each and every one floundered under the weight of the memory of Maradona's achievements. However, it's not just football where Argentina's weighed down by nostalgia.
Argentines do live in the past.
And they're pessimist about the future, and they're pessimist about the present, but they're very proud about the past.
There's this real nostalgia for the 1920s, which makes sense because that's when Argentina really mattered.
It's a country that's slow to modernise.
It's profoundly nostalgic culture, it's always harking back.
There's a lot written about and research about what you can tell about a society through its national song.
And the tango, of course, is this very passionate dance, but it's also a very nostalgic dance.
Que tiempos aquellos eran otros hombres, más hombres los nuestros.
It's sort of infused with this sense of things were better in the past, and this is all doomed.
Barra antigua de ayer, ¿dónde están? Yo y vos solo quedamos hermanos, yo y vos solo para recordar.
The lyrics are about unrequited love, about dreams not materializing, about about yesteryear.
Me siento a recordar a la gente de la barra y a los que hoy ya no están.
And that tells a lot about Argentine society as well.
Qué buenos tiempos aquellos.
You look at the architecture.
The architecture of Buenos Aires, all the good stuff was done in the beginning of the 20th century or late 19th century.
The way the waiters dress.
They wear the white shirts, black bow ties, black aprons. It's harking back to how waiters were dressed in the 1920s.
But you look at some of the buses, it's artistry that belongs to the 50s.
You know, walking around the city, you'll see it from old-fashioned stores to bars. Anywhere in Argentina, you're going to get this, but they're like kind of little snapshots and postcards of the past. I mean, we're doing this interview in a bar that basically hasn't changed its decor since the 1960s, so, you know, you're already in a time warp.
Well, you tend to idolize the past, you know? Memory is a tricky thing. In a nation or in a country where truly, back in the days, at least materially speaking, things were better, that natural tendency to glorify the past, it becomes magnified.
And there's a reason it's so magnified in Argentina, as its power and prestige of the 20th century is anything but in the 21st century.
We are very far away from the glory years of the beginning of last century. Now there is beyond 55% of poverty in Argentina.
Argentina is now more synonymous with economic crises and crashes than a prosperous new world country.
It's gotten to the point where a lot of people are deciding that the only thing they can do is just go away, leave the country.
Argentina, que era un país que recibía a la gente de todas partes del mundo, ahora los está expulsando.
The Argentine nation could have been much more than it is, than it's become. There's all the questions about what happened, where did it go wrong?
Corruption, political institutions, the culture of the people.
There are lots of reasons.
Partly the repercussions of the Wall Street crash in 1929.
The reasons range from political instability.
And of course, post-1930, the history of Argentina has been coup after coup after coup after coup.
Sociological reasons.
Porque acá se piensa que todo, si haces las cosas legal, sos un boludo.
From political projects.
The majority of the rest of the wealthy world, at least, signs up to GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades, which facilitated international trade. And Argentina remain aloof from that. They don't sign up.
Simple answer.
Tell me your answer.
Okay. What changes this? The model that we have for development, for economic development, we actually have a name for it. El modelo agroexportador.
América Latina se reacomoda en el nuevo mercado mundial y Argentina se incorpora como una de las principales productoras de alimentos y materias primas. La reorientación genera un nuevo patrón económico, el modelo agroexportador.
It stopped being useful because international situation changed. It became about industrialization. It was no longer about exporting commodities. The relative prices of what we have to offer went down, and our main market disappeared. So all those things combined, that was the problem. And if you want to read a couple of books about it, I can recommend it to you. No problem.
And so where does an extremely proud and passionate nation who was once a dominant global force look to find a similar sense of importance in the world? The world game, of course.
I think Argentina is unique in the way it celebrates football, and particularly the World Cup, because the World Cup is how Argentina expresses itself to the world.
Creo que ahí en el fútbol es donde nos sentimos potencia en general. En Argentina se siente potencia en el mundo a través del fútbol.
So the thing with the World Cup for Argentina is it's not just about football, just being the best of football. It's about being the best at something.
That is how they show their worth, or how they validate themselves, particularly to a European audience.
So while we might not dominate anymore, on several fields, especially industry, we can actually say that football is the one thing where we can still be the very, very, very best.
There is reality, an objective reality, and then there is perception. Every nation perceives itself in some way. We perceive ourselves as really, really good. And the only time that reality and perception match is when we play football.
And then came the 2002 World Cup in Japan, South Korea, which played out just as the country fell to a new low.
Huge numbers of people lost huge amounts of money.
The country was ravaged.
The economy is just devastated because they can't pay their debt.
Mired in a $93 billion debt to the IMF, demonstrations, riots and general chaos sent the country into near societal collapse. The only glimmer of light being their best national team in decades, who under coach Marcelo Bielsa went to the tournament filled with optimism.
In 2002, they qualified brilliantly under Bielsa.
You know, in such a great form.
Qualifying, they destroy everybody.
A lot of unbeaten games.
Yeah, they're favourites. They're definitely favourites.
And then, for the first time in 40 years,
Argentina crashed at the group stage.
Argentina's best World Cup hope in decades fell at the first hurdle. And so that mythological Argentine utopia of '86 felt further away than ever. And with its economy, government and streets in tatters, it really felt like it was never coming back. However, little did they know, another Pibe had emerged. Next time on Once in a Lifetime.
Needed something to celebrate, something to believe, something to be hopeful about.
Yet one game in, it already looked doomed.
So after the Saudi game, we couldn't lose anymore. One more loss and we're out.
They play Mexico next.
If we would have drawn against Mexico, we were out in the second game.
So basically it was sudden death from that moment on.